There are a lot of double standards in government, but when that government now uses double standards to punish conservatives and reward liberals for the same behavior, we've got a problem. I'm Dr. Duke, and this is the Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Before we start, I want to take a moment to invite any business owners out there that would like to support our program through advertising to email us. The Dr. Duke Show reaches tens of thousands of like-minded people every day, hundreds of thousands occasionally, and we could be a great partner to help promote your business. Simply email media@fpeusa.org. That's media@fpeusa.org to get the conversation started. All right. Katie begins this lovely Friday by kicking off a look at the health of our republic.
It wouldn't be a day that ends in Y if Joe Biden wasn't yelling at reporters. And it's not because of the reporter doing anything wrong. It's just that when you're involved in a family fight, things get heated and possibly a little dinged and dented.
Why has it been so challenging to unite the party? Why is the party united? Why is the party united?
50-50. Come on, man. Unite the party. 50-50. I got it.
Are you serious? He has it. Come on, man. And that's the president. And yet, as we all know, nothing in this administration is serious. No one has anything. And how dare you gender anyone, man? But back in Joe's grandpop day, you know, the thing.
Parenthetically, when you build a charging station, it's like back in the day when my grandpa worked for the American Oil Company back in the turn of in the 1920 in that area. They went from state to state convincing people that they allowed them to put 20,000 gallons of gasoline under the ground. They didn't want them around.
Anywho, it's been a week for Joe and the likes of Nancy Pelosi as they were both out there pitching the $3.5 trillion reconciliation plan that is striking out. I'm guessing that's why last week, on the eve of the budget reconciliation showdown, Nancy Pelosi spent the congressional baseball game on the phone trying to calm everyone down about the bickering from within the ranks of the Democrat Party.
Speaker, no doubt happy about that play, but she is known as a big sports fan, and often after dealing with a lot of really difficult reporter questions related to what's going on.
Do the members of the Democrat Party not know that she controls all of them? But who am I kidding? Pelosi spent the second inning putting in an order for extra chocolate chunk and some Rocky Road, because that's what we're all experiencing right now. It's been a rocky road. But that brings us to today's question. What do you think Nancy was saying on the phone, and to whom? Please share this video with your friends to get their guesses too. Now, some people seem to think Nancy was working on the budget reconciliation, but really, 2 pints of cookies and cream to the first row by the third base dugout, or else. And she probably ordered it just in time for the biggest ice cream fan of all time to get his 2 scoops.
There he is. President Biden making an appearance here.
He hugs House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. I'm sure this is a nice evening diversion for the president with all the pressures that he has had to deal with this week. Huge week for the members of Congress as they're dealing with so many issues right now, whether
It's a welcome distraction for both of them because, like Biden, Nancy has been getting mint chocolate chippy.
Debt limit extension might not advance in the Senate. Why get mad at members? Why twist the arms of moderates if this is not going to move anywhere?
What are you talking about? We have a responsibility to uphold, to lift up the full faith and credit of the United States of America. That's what we have to do. These members have all voted for this last week. So if they're concerned about how it might be in an ad, it's already in an ad. It's already in an ad. So let us give every confidence every step of the way that we will do that. We cannot predicate our actions in the House on what could happen in the Senate. We can when we're coming to agreement on a bill. But in terms of this, I have no patience for people not voting for the full.
Thanks, everyone.
Ooh, Ooh, such salty caramel from her is probably because both Nancy and Joe haven't been getting their daily intake of the butter pecan. We'll get to that in a moment, but before I move on from the congressional baseball game that was the night before the big reconciliation showdown failure, I just have to give a shout out to Representative Greg Steube of Florida, who actually was there to play baseball. Just listen to the announcers, because it's poetic.
Democrats were trying to get caught up. Wow, this is a long
Greg
ball.
Steube with the first pitch, and the first swing is going to be a home run. Steube out of the ballpark into the left field bleachers. Steube with the very first offering from Pete Aguilar swings and sends it to left field and out. While everybody's milling with the president, they played baseball, and Steube wants to bring the attention back to the field.
Absolutely. I believe that is the first out-of-the-park home run in this game in more than 40 years.
That's a nice hit. Now, even the uniforms give you perspective of how things operate. The Republicans have a team jersey and pants, while the Democrats are all in whatever jersey that probably feels nice to them. We can't be united, one team, one dream, because it's every person for they themselves. As we know, it's all a game in Washington, a cutthroat one at that. So to sit back and watch the inroads fighting between the Democratic Party is poetry in motion. And in case you wanted to know,
the president in attendance tonight. The Republicans with the win over the Democrats, 13-12.
That's a good summary right there, because the Democrats are fighting amongst themselves. Most of the ire is against Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, because they won't just bow to the party lines on the, again, $3.5 trillion budget reconciliation bill. They clearly aren't listening to the president.
So guess what? You got nothing. Zero. No help. My friends in the other team have no problem giving billionaires and millionaires gigantic tax breaks. This is a tax cut.
Oh, it's actually a tax cut. Silly on all of us. But Manchin and Sinema are now evil for thinking it wasn't a tax cut and for actually representing the interests of the citizens in their states. Now, Bernie Sanders decided to put out his own commie ire, showing how if you think for yourself, you clearly are in the wrong. Sanders tweeted, 2 senators cannot be allowed to defeat what 48 senators and 210 House members want. We must stand with the working families of our country. We must combat climate change. We must delay passing the infrastructure bill until we pass a strong reconciliation bill. Carry the wand. Yep, math is still racist. But since we know that there are 100 senators in total, and Bernie only counts on the total being 50 in his equation, he's leaving out half. And as we know, it's 50 Republican senators we're completely ignoring, and those 2 pesky Democrat senators, meaning 52 in total, who are allowed to defeat a bill to what the 46 Democrats and technically 2 independents, of which Bernie's supposed to be one of them, it's of what they want. So clearly, math is racist. But he'll try to make it seem like he's the good guy with his tweets like this. What if, and stick with me for a minute, because this is a pretty far out concept to some of my Republican colleagues in Washington. What if we built a government that delivered for working class people and not just corporations and the billionaire class? What if, and stick with me for a minute, because this is a pretty far out concept for basically all of Congress in Washington. What if we built a government that followed the Constitution and had members of Congress who didn't stay in office for decades just to line their own pockets so they become part of the millionaire class, having not built anything like what those corporations did, because at least they gave jobs to people along the way and fueled the economy? Yeah, I know. All of that would be too long for a single tweet.
We are not just taking on or dealing with Senators Manchin or Senator Sinema. We're taking on the entire ruling class of this country. Right now, the drug companies, the health insurance companies, the fossil fuel industry are spending hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to prevent us from doing what the American people want. And this really is a test of whether or not American democracy can work. The Republican Party is bought and paid for by the pharmaceutical industry. They're not going to do anything.
And the Democrat Party is bought and paid for by the teachers' unions and the media. They're not going to do anything. And that's why when that pesky Kyrsten Sinema is harassed on a college campus about the vote while in the bathroom, it's just justified by the media as matter of fact.
It's U.S. Senator Kyrsten Sinema confronted in a way that she probably never expected on her way to the ladies' room.
Sit down, we want to talk to you real quick.
Actually, I am heading out.
As she heads into the bathroom on the campus of Arizona State University, she's followed right in.
We knocked on doors for you to get you elected.
There, they wait and wait. Yep, they're still there when she comes out of the stall.
As you can see, she does wash her hands, which is a good thing. But then President Biden attempts to condemn their actions. But
Do you think that those tactics are crossing a line?
I don't think they're appropriate tactics, but it happens to everybody. From the only people it doesn't happen to are people who have Secret Service standing around them. It's part of the process, yes.
oh, it's just part of the process. And so with Biden's blessing of these things happen, later that day, Sinema is harassed again, this time on a plane by an illegal immigrant.
I just need to know if you can commit to passing a budget reconciliation that would include immigration and citizenship for people to be protected, like me and many others.
So you have two senators who aren't abiding by the wishes of the party dictators, and so they must be punished. They should know to be more like the highest of dictators, the ones who are having a much better week than all of them. Barack Obama announced that he was celebrating 29 years with Mish, as he says. But just a few days prior, his other favorite pantsuit put up a photo of them snuggling together. Uh-oh, maybe we have the next drama of the Democrats. That would help distract from the simple fact that Biden's approval rating continues to circle back on the drain of despair. At last glance of the 538 polling, Biden was at 48.1% disapproval compared to 44.8% approval. And some polls even have him at 50% disapproval. But the real kicker is that independents don't like what he's doing. The AP NORC poll found that Biden's approval among the independents dropped from 62% in July to a mere 38% now. Ouch. So keep on fighting amongst yourselves, Democrats. It's not like you should be out there representing an entire country or anything. That'd be silly. Anywho, you, independent individual, keep on being you and make sure to share this video. Please and thank you. Until next time, stay healthy, America.
Joined now by Vicki McKenna for CultureCast. Vicki, great to see you this week.
Good to see you, Duke.
Well, I think we're seeing the metastasization of the cancer of big government now. They have now, in a number of ways, decided that the American people themselves are the enemy. And what's good for progressives is bad for conservatives and vice versa. Let's just start with an obvious example. We found out this week, I should say, that the federal agencies now, the Department of Justice, are going to send federal goons to deal with moms and dads who are protesting critical race theory. This is an unbelievable fascist overreach. Talk a little bit about what's going on here.
So the DOJ under Merrick Garland, remember when this guy was described as a moderate, is going to be using, I believe it's 7 different sub agencies under the DOJ umbrella to investigate domestic extremism and terrorism being committed against school board members. What examples is the Department of Justice giving? Are they actually citing examples where someone tried to pipe bomb a school board member's mailbox or something like that? No. It is parents who show up at school board meetings, take their 3 minutes of time that they are allotted, and are angry about their children being used as lab rats for social experimentation by infusing the toxic poison of critical race theory or whatever it goes by in those schools, telling school board members they're terrible representatives of the people, saying that we pay taxes, these are our children, we have a say. You know, really alarming and incredibly incendiary things like this, or complaining that their children are being hijacked for medical experimentation in masks, or using masks or vaccine mandates to try to force parents to knuckle under. That's what the Department of Justice has now broadly defined as a category. They are going to be hunting for domestic extremists and domestic terrorists. And by the way, this comes after the left-wing National Association of School Boards demands that the government use the Patriot Act to put parents who are upset about what is going on in their children's awful schools in jail.
Yeah, and this is just one example of many of this kind of double standard overreach. We were watching this weekend where Christine Sinema committed the cardinal sin of bucking the Democrat trend. She was not going to go along with the $3.5 trillion, which really is really $10 trillion program of Biden. And so you have activists, not even college kids, activists wandering onto college campuses to harass her while she was in the bathroom. And feminist groups from coast to coast say, this is wonderful, this is fantastic. A woman being assaulted in a bathroom, as long as she's a Republican, that's wonderful. Meanwhile, the minute you say one thing at an abortion clinic or you challenge the pro-choice issues, suddenly you are anti-women and you're doing actual violent harm to women.
Anything that the people support is necessarily the enemy of the progressives. Understand that if the majority of people want to have their schools stop teaching the poison and racism of CRT, they're the problem. Christian Sinema seems to think that we shouldn't be spending $10 trillion we don't have in order to prop up the third world and make sure we institutionalize inflation so that people's retirements are worth less and less every year. How dare she? But that's against the progressives, and so she's an enemy of the people. But think about this, Duke. You have all of these lawful citizens who show up at school board meetings, and we're all telling them to do this. Show up at your local boards of government. Go to your city council. Go to your school board meeting. All of these lawful tax-paying citizens of the United States are now being relegated into a category of potential domestic terrorists. Meanwhile, the illegal aliens stalking Kirsten Sinema in a bathroom at the airport, who are mad at her because she's not voting for more money to prop up illegal aliens who haven't been paying those taxes, but are taking advantage of the system in the United States. They're the good guys. And it goes even further than that. It's not even just the obvious comparative hypocrisy. If any politician or any person on the right is attacked, it's necessarily a good thing. Steve King got shot by a leftist, and the leftists couldn't find their way to condemn the violence. Rand Paul was attacked and assaulted by leftists, and the left could not find a way to condemn the violence. But if there is sternly worded letters or strong language at school board meetings, by golly, we need to rack those people up. Perhaps extraordinary rendition is appropriate in these cases.
Hey, Guantanamo's empty now. All the thugs are leading the
Good
Taliban.
Point.
After the break, I want to pick this last point up again. Back again with Vicki McKenna and CultureCast. Vicki made a brilliant point. I'll give you one more example of it. All last summer, we saw agitators and Antifa and Black Lives Matter organizations burning, looting, pillaging, assaulting. And this was protest, right? And meanwhile, you had in January...
Righteous protest. Yes.
Just righteous protest. In the middle of a COVID pandemic, when you and I couldn't go to church... If we had turned out in our devil masks and started throwing bricks, suddenly that would have been legitimate protest, right? Meanwhile, one time on January 6th, a handful of idiots wandered around without being armed, wandered around the Capitol building without being invited in, and many of them, 9 months later, are still sitting in jail cells.
Yeah.
Wow.
Shocking. It actually is pretty stunning. Nobody's getting arrested for the ongoing violence in Portland. Portland is an occupied territory by an enemy force hostile to America, and nothing. Seattle, the same thing. There is random criminal violence that breaks out every single weekend. Not far from us in Chicago, you have a district attorney that is not going to be charging homicides as long as the homicides are committed by the right people. But yeah, you've got a handful of folks. Most of the people who went to Washington, D.C. on January 6th were grandmas, grandpas, veterans from Vietnam, who were just there to protest their government, to protest the outcome of the election, to demand redress of their grievances, all of these things that are covered in the First Amendment. Some of them walked through an open door that wasn't barricaded and essentially were escorted in by Capitol guards who are actually nothing more than tourist security guards in Washington, D.C. for the most part. And next thing you know, We've got an armed insurrection that must result in 650 people being investigated and charged, and about 60 of them sitting in solitary confinement. By the way, if you look at the video, and there were a handful of thugs who were dressed in black, looked nothing like the actual protesters who were there, wearing helmets. It looked an awful lot like Antifa, quite frankly. None of them have been charged. None of them who were wearing the helmets and slamming crowbars into windows. There were a handful of those people, but none of them were charged, which of course has some of us out here wondering how many of them were actual federal agents.
Well, you also have a Capitol security guard who blew a woman's head off, who was unarmed, in a room full of unarmed people. And a couple of weeks ago,
claimed he feared for his death.
He feared for his life by an unarmed woman, right? When the only people who had guns was the security staff. And no one's bothered by that either. Can you imagine Black Lives Matter?
Completely okay.
Can you imagine Black Lives Matter if a white cop had killed a black woman in a very similar protest in a federal building? What would we be hearing right now? That cop would be on trial for his life.
You bet.
Even in a little small college like Emerson College this week, we had a remarkable situation where a group of Republican kids were handing out buttons challenging and calling out the Chinese government. One button said something to the effect of, the Chinese government, Chinese communism is SUS, which is, I think, a euphemism for Chinese communism sucks. Well, what did the university do? They immediately launched an investigation because to criticize the Chinese government, a government that has 1.1 million Uyghur Muslims in slave camps, to challenge the Chinese government is anti-Asian hate.
Think about this. The Uyghurs that are being held in slave camps are also being used to harvest organs for the for-profit organ market. And nobody seems to think that's a big deal either. There's actual genocide going on in communist China, but nobody seems to think that's anything we should concern ourselves with. No. It was that handful of Republican kids on campus who thought it was still okay to express their First Amendment rights and criticize a sworn enemy of the United States. Not anymore, Duke. Things are absolutely upside down. But going back to the Ashley Babbitt murder, a police officer shot an unarmed woman. If that same black police officer had shot an unarmed black woman who happened to not be a Trump supporter, but was a Black Lives Matter supporter, the city would have burned down. The Capitol would have been torn apart stone by stone, and the left elite media would have cheered every single second of it.
It's time for some real education. The Course of Empire, Desolation, Thomas Cole's final painting in his series. We've been talking about The Course of Empire. What happens to a country that starts off with as a small country with a good idea, like America did, that ultimately gives way to empire? Empire ultimately gives way to destruction and desolation. Take a look at the last picture in the series. We've seen the progress across these 5 paintings for Thomas Cole. And here we have the last one. This one is called The Course of Empire, Desolation. So what we see here is the 5th and final painting in the Course of Empire series by Thomas Cole. Thomas Cole was born in 1801, died in 1848. 1849. He was a remarkable painter who had a very moralistic point behind his paintings. If you think about the series as we've watched it over the last 5 days, it starts from the birth of a nation, basically, and how that nation becomes a bit too big for its britches, begins to involve itself in global affairs, becomes an empire, not an actual representative republic or democracy. And finally, we saw the rise of that empire and then the fall of that empire. And what happens after empires fall? What's the final stage of the course of empire as painted by Thomas Cole? It's this 5th painting called Desolation. It shows the results decades later after the fall of what was a once vibrant civilization. The remains of the city here are highlighted in the livid light of a dying day. The landscape has begun to return back to the wilderness. All that building, all of that construction, all of that opulence and wealth is becoming overgrown by the weeds. In another 1,000 years, it'll all be ruined. A terrible plague of visitation on the hubris of human beings. So we see how the landscape has begun to return to wilderness, and humans are not to be seen, no people. But the remnants of their architecture emerge from beneath a mantle of trees and ivy and other overgrowth. The broken stumps of what used to be the lighthouses loom in the background. The arches of the shattered bridge and the columns of the temple are still visible to the naked eye, but a single column looms precariously in the foreground, now a nesting place for birds and other fowl. The sunrise of the first painting is mirrored here by the moonrise, a pale light reflecting in the ruin-choked river, while the standing pillar reflects the last fleeting rays of a dying sun. This gloomy picture suggests how all empires could be and will be after their fall. It is a harsh and possible future in which humanity has been destroyed by its own hand. Think, if you ever want to read a literary version of this kind of desolation, read the great poem Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley. Ozymandias is a sonnet talking about this exactly picture, not this picture per se, but the same image, a fallen empire and what little of it remains in the sand in the desert. Very compelling. Ozymandias, a nice written companion of this Thomas Cole painting. All right, just a quick reminder that the best way to access our content is to download our Freedom Project Media app. Simply search Freedom Project in your app store and get access to 18 new videos a week, plus all of our award-winning lectures and animations. Now, we always do at this time take a moment to show some love for our Patriot Club members. Today, we give a great big shout out to Sonia from Edmond, Oklahoma. I used to live in Stillwater, so Okies to you, Sandra. Thanks for your support. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. Until next time, stay educated.